So, welcome everyone to today's podcast with Nikki Cashbowl of Technology Business Research and me, Dave Smith of Inflow Analysis, and our great guest, Alan Need, Director Smart Spaces and IoT, Aruba, a Hewlett Packard Enterprise company. Now, I had a chance to meet with Alan and his team live in person in the office before our world, I guess, got turned upside down, so to speak, with COVID. But was very impressed that the thought and innovation put into the work, Alan, that you were doing to improve the physical and overall employee and people experience with your smart office initiative. So, welcome, Alan.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to chat and talk with you live, Dave.
Absolutely. Now, Nick, we've been very fortunate on these podcasts to speak with a plethora of voices and people of different disciplines. The workplace theme has been sort of preeminent, right, in our discussions, and also the constant theme of the linkage of the employee and the customer experience. Just overall, smarter workplace centered on actual people theme has been pretty prevalent, right?
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, definitely, and welcome, Alan. That's definitely almost like an understatement. It's more than a prevalent theme. As a cloud analyst at TBR, I hear no shortage of words like digital and transformation, and usually they're uttered really in the same breath, the digital transformation. And while I thought of it as really solely referring to the increasing adoption of the cloud, the move to more remote and dispersed edge environments, coupled with the fallout of the pandemic and also the opportunities that it's created for these technologies to be showcased is really fascinating for me personally, as someone who works remotely, as many people still do, and also as someone who has a whole bunch of people that they speak with and clients who are trying to figure out how to make this work for themselves. And Alan, when I listened to your webcast that you did recently about the reimagined workplace, and I really like that word reimagined, because it's kind of a different and I think a better way of just saying the new normal. But before we dig in, could you give us a little bit of a background on yourself and your role at Aruba?
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks for having me again. So as Dave said, I lead the Smart Spaces and IoT team. At Aruba, we sit within the Aruba CTO team, and my team ultimately is responsible for innovation, strategy, and a lot of the solutions definitions as it pertains to bridging the physical and the digital, right? So we have a lot of great digital technologies. Aruba is well known for things like networking, Wi-Fi, location services, and how do we tie those into actual physical spaces, right? And a really great place where we've seen a lot of momentum both prior to COVID and right now, as Dave kind of mentioned before, is in the actual workplace itself, right? And that could be a commercial carpeted office, a workplace could be a retailer, it could be a factory floor, et cetera. But, we like to practice what we preach, and, being a technology company, our workplace is more of a carpeted office. So we've been able to, in the past and continue to do so, create a lot of innovation, both with our own technology and a lot of partner technologies within our space.
Thanks, Alan. As I mentioned before, I really did enjoy that recent announcement about the vision for the Reimagine workplace. Could you go into a little bit more detail around what this entails, as well as a couple of the key scenarios or even use cases for what you're envisioning, just so people can kind of get a better idea versus just conceptually what this actually means for them?
Yeah, so let me share with you a little bit around the genesis of this idea and the term, the reimagined workplace, and maybe unpack that a little bit. So you have to understand, prior to COVID, Aruba, as I said, we're really well known for our networking technology, a lot of our wireless technology, mainly Wi-Fi, and we powered a lot of workplaces, like traditional workplaces, non-traditional workplaces, with tremendous sort of mobility technology. Right. And when you tie that in with a lot of the other apps, whether it's like unified communication apps, location mobility, it was why we were kind of seen as a leader in that specific space. And prior to COVID, I'd say last decade, dare I say, we saw a lot of capital construction, a lot of companies, tech and non-tech companies, that were rebuilding their space to kind of really make it a lot more modular, to focus on supporting people, not just for focal work, but for co-creation. And obviously location, mobility, or security were all really, really important pieces to that. So when we think about that, and if you met me and when Dave and I met, we talked about building a digital workplace, or in some cases, as we brought in IoT, et cetera, building a smart digital workplace. But then we had the pandemic hit most recently, and everything kind of shut down. And I don't know, I've talked to people, and it's almost like the 9/11 event of office space.
Yeah.
And as we kind of thought about that, we said, okay, what does this mean? This smart digital workplace that we were just talking about weeks or months ago may no longer exist in that same form because we're all trying to distance more. There may be people working from distant locations a lot more often. So we didn't want to use that term digital workplace. We didn't want to use the term smart digital workplace anymore. We wanted to create a term that connoted this new norm. And when we thought about it, we said there's a couple of ways that Aruba is supporting these folks, and let's try to build it into a narrative. So outside of kind of the technology that supported the traditional office, Aruba had a very strong remote working portfolio. So this is basically an access point that you could put in your home, that you could plug in, wired peripherals into, that would almost seem like you were in the office, right? And the whole idea was around this user experience where when I'm from home, I don't need to, jump through hoops or work through some very maddening steps. For example, logging into a VPN or getting logged out every 2 hours, right? If I have a wired device, how do I connect it as if I were in the office? And that product was originally for business continuity events, right? So hurricane came and we're out of the office for a week. Can we get certain individuals to work? But as we saw the tech companies first talk about this, hey, there's going to be certain parts of the workforce that are going to be at home 50% of the time, or maybe exclusively 100% of the time. We kind of said, okay, this is no longer a BCP solution, but this is going to be a remote working solution. And given, back in March or April, that's where exclusively people worked. And even to this point, we're all working remotely. We said, this is going to be a constant, right? So we're going to talk more about that solution and build upon that solution, less as a business continuity solution, but more as a kind of more permanent work from home solution. The second piece we said is pretty soon, and right now we're starting to see this, folks and organizations need to start to think about reopening the office, right? And in initial phases, what sort of tools can we provide to be able to provide the health and safety into the office, right? And there's been a lot of demand, a lot of inquiries from us, and we're starting to provide native tools to provide deeper analytics into the space around space utilization, so we understand where people are. Are we spacing people the way we designed it to be? Are we cleaning in the right areas? All the way to tools such as contact tracing. So heaven forbid we have someone that's sick. Can we actually find potential contacts within the space that we should notify just to give them the heads up to monitor for conditions, et cetera. So that's the second phase, and we're actively, and the team is really actively trying to deliver a product here. We've already started to bring some customers onto some of the solutions we provided. And then really the third piece is this idea of, the office, when we finally get back to whatever the norm is, we do envision that it's going to be a norm where we'll probably have a lot more people working remotely in concert with the people that are actually in the office. And how do we make everyone more of a first party citizen in that sort of environment, right? So in the past, we designed collisionable spaces, but now that's kind of not in vogue. We had very densified spaces, and we're ironically trying to de-densify. How do we actually get people to collaborate and co-create a lot more effectively in this hybrid sort of environment? And we call that the hybrid workplace, that third stage. So if you combine all three, kind of the work from home, the return to office and the safety, and then the hybrid workplace, we're collectively putting it under the umbrella of this reimagined workplace. So sorry, a little long-winded, but just wanted to walk you through a story there.
No, that's great. Actually, thanks for doing that because it gave a real good context and some I guess some life to it, right? And with that, right, this is now our new reality, right? And so as we try to navigate this, and you brought up something real important, it's like, how do people feel safe now, right? Return to work. And so what are some of the lessons you're learning as you're sort of navigating this and, putting your solutions together? How do we actually make people feel safe? Not just tell them it's safe. How do we make them feel safe returning to the office?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually privileged to be on kind of our workplace experience team, which not only includes technologists like myself, but people from real estate, HR, et cetera. I mean, there's a lot. It's pretty funny as a lot of companies are building their return to office protocol, including Aruba and HPE. You start with the very basics, right? Some of them that don't even include technology, right? Just hand sanitizers. Maybe you put Lysol on everyone's desk, because how do you know, even though I claim to clean the desk, you may still want to do a once over, right? So things like that, all the way to, as I kind of alluded to before, there's a lot of interest around this location aware office, right? So making people safe from that perspective to say, hey, we're starting to really actively understand how the building is being used, and where if someone were at risk, we have the ability to be able to allow us to forensically kind of be a little more intelligible to figure out where we need to clean or exactly who we need to inform, all the way to things on the experience side. And I know you have other guests that have talked about this, more like touchless experiences, right? So can I go into a specific building, and instead of, typing on some shared surface or, touching a conference room phone, could we start to be a lot more autonomous around and smart around getting those devices to be kind of aware of my presence to kick off some neat and smart sort of features, right? So you're seeing touchless kiosks, you're seeing things like voice control, things that we've talked about in the past, Dave, right? And that were perceived as nice to haves or just super experiential, now take form to say, hey, there's actually a sanitary or hygiene sort of angle that we could apply this to as well. So, those are just a few items.
Yeah. So it seems to me that, I guess, the transformation that we've all been talking about, right, writing about, speaking at conferences about, is actually happening right now in terms of automation in the workplace and so forth.
Yes, for sure. Automation, things that we've talked about in the past, ironically, location-based services, automation, just sensors, they're really starting to take form. They're all that foundation. It's the same foundation, and we're just applying, and some of the workflows are slightly adjusted to kind of accommodate some of the new needs.
Alan, you mentioned the smart office or the smart workplace, and I don't know if that's like a term that was coined before the pandemic. I mean, I've heard of smart solutions before. Yeah. Do you see a kind of a recoining of even the brand of what being a smart workplace means, since all of them will likely have to be quote unquote smart in some ways, that sensors on chairs won't be considered out of the norm? Well, of course we have to monitor where you were so you don't get your coworkers sick, and create, analytical patterns around, traffic in the office place and all of that. Like, do you have kind of like a notional concept of where you're going?
Yeah. So let me walk you through really quickly. So when I first got into this, probably about 2 years ago, the term I heard was smart building. Right. And as we started to unpack that, almost every instance of smart building was really focused around the building itself and costs around energy costs, efficiency, greenness. And there's a bunch of us that said, where the hell is the end user in all of this? Right. So from there, we won't take full credit for it, but we definitely put a lot of focus around this as we kind of coined this term, at least internally. And you saw us market a lot of this stuff around the smart digital workplace. So there was already a digital workplace, and people thought of that as, collaboration tools, WebEx or Skype for Business, et cetera. And we're like, okay, this needs to be a little more physical. So let's kind of just hodgepodge these terms together. So we call it the smart digital workplace. right now, as we kind of go into this new paradigm, we've talked about the reimagined workplace. The hybrid workplace is something we've been trying to land our feet on. I've heard others talk about it as more of like a autonomous workplace. I've talked to some real estate professionals, and they've kind of put their feet around that. So I don't think there's one de facto term yet, Nicole, but we wanted to connote that it was different than January 2020 or December of 2019. And at least in our end, we're thinking of this as the hybrid workplace, or others are calling it the autonomous workplace. We'll see where we land.
I guess I'm less hung up on the brand itself and more just what the implications are. But as we're all in the thick of it,
okay.
Somewhat of an unfair question, so I kind of apologize. Kind of not. I just wanted to pick your brain to see what your thoughts were. Regarding the word hybrid. Being a cloud analyst, that's of course something that I type out probably 20 times a day.
Yes.
So that certainly resonates with me, and with cloud being at the core of enabling the bandwidth and just operationalizing all of these great visions for the reimagined workplace. I think that terminology totally makes sense. And hybrid also allows a lot of room for flexibility and for change, because it's not one thing and it's not another. It's kind of like, it's hybrid. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I get your question. Sorry about that. But let me give you.
I dropped a little bit too, so I apologize for that. But this is an imperfect world, so we'll just keep going.
Yeah. So let me give you two thoughts. So one, what are some of the implications I'm starting to see as I share, as I chat with peers with respect to physical space, and then the second piece I'll talk about maybe some of the tools that we may have some ultimate implications on as well. So from a space perspective, I think there's definitely a movement more towards a lot more modular sort of spaces. We're already moving there, but I'm starting to look at certain plans where they're starting to say, instead of 60% of the office, being focused towards desks for focal work, if people are going to be working from home, we should be building, spaces that are more conducive to meetings, co-creation, almost like client conferencing spaces, if you will, to be able to support that. And then make those spaces modular enough so that if we were to enter an event similar to this, maybe it's something else down the road, we have the ability to be able to compartmentalize those spaces, almost like a submarine, with compartments. You have a leak, like you could shut something off and not like harm the rest of the ship, right? And we're starting to see some very interesting designs from there. Now, it's funny, the irony, I talked about co-creation, conferencing. I've had some debates with people to say, okay, what happens with the conference room or these 4-person conference rooms? And I've heard everything from, they just become temporarily very expensive chair storage, right? to maybe just one person sort of focal rooms. So there's definitely some pretty pronounced changes that we could probably expect from a physical space perspective. As we think about how it may, what sort of investments from a technology perspective to support this hybrid environment, I think we're living this right now. Sometimes a lot of people get Zoom fatigue or whatever. When I think right now we're all equally at home, so no one's disadvantaged. But when some people start to be in the office and certain people are working from home, there probably needs to be better sort of technology. And I don't know if this is necessarily AR or VR type of technology, or more immersive sort of conferencing to make the people that are working remote be more a part of the actual, conversation. I think we've all been on the occasional meeting where there's 10 people in the room and we're on the phone, or maybe we're on a Zoom, and you just don't have that same sort of experience, right? So I do envision that there'll probably be some additional technology that will make the UC experience even more immersive, and also just tools that are more suited to asynchronous work. Right now, we're on a synchronous platform, but as people start to move remote, or maybe are slightly different time zones, how do we get people to work together more effectively and be just as efficient as if we were within the building?
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And then probably the last piece is culture. I mean, a lot of these spaces, why we put everyone under a specific sort of roof is to kind of create a specific sort of culture, create sort of collisionable experiences. How do you replicate that in a digital domain or a hybrid domain, right? So I think there's actually a lot of opportunity in this space. And then obviously from our perspective at Aruba, we're going to need to figure out what these trends are and how do we ultimately connect these technologies or connect these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's solving for the people, right? Because you're right. You know, we go through sort of different modes of work throughout our day, right? It's at some parts we are synchronous, right, and at some parts we are asynchronous, right? We're not in real time, but with digital, everything's so immediate, right? So how do you sort of escape that? I guess the Zoom fatigue, as you mentioned, right, and sort of solve for how people actually work on a day-to-day basis. So that's the human aspect of it all.
Yeah, correct.
And I also think, I was thinking back to maybe a past life, and this might not be everyone's experience, but I think we sometimes romanticize how great it was to always be under one roof, especially if you have a globally dispersed team. Like I remember at a previous engagement being in adjoining cubicles and everyone on the same call, but no one in the same room, and there was no pandemic. And then feeling very, very disjointed from our colleagues in completely different geographies. So I see incredible silver lining opportunity, and I'm not really a natural optimist when it comes to anything usually. So I think all the things that you're speaking of, Alan, will resonate with some people who, whether they had to or whether they felt like they had to be part of an office environment and are slowly reacclimating back into whatever the reimagined reality is, makes sense. And people kind of have a little more leeway and autonomy to make it what they want it to be, which is kind of refreshing.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely a great experiment, right? But I said,
I've never heard that term before, but that's great. Yeah, go ahead.
don't underestimate the power of place. I think a lot of us right now for a quarter or so working in this environment, many of us were all in an office where we shared coffee, we had the water cooler conversation, we're in the same room, we lunched together, and we built, not just work professional experiences, but got to know one another in a different level, different way. And I think it's almost like a bank, right? Right now, everyone's working remote. We're basically drawing down the balance on all those relationships. And as people inevitably, as time goes on, people are going to start changing organizations, changing companies. If you start in remote and you don't have those relationships that you've built, through work, through tools, what have you, through being just present under the same roof, that could impact culture pretty significantly. That could also impact effectiveness of the teams, innovation of the teams, right? Hence, what I kind of said, it'd be kind of interesting to see in several months, in a year or so, what kind of new tools may kind of been born out of this era, right? What kind of creative thinkers are out there that are thinking of new ways of collaborating?
No, absolutely. And I think you sort of are leading to, what's next, right? I mean, where do we go from here? And not to, make you the Swami and bring out your crystal ball or anything, but, what's your sort of personal view of where we go from here now, from a workplace perspective?
Well, I don't want to say crystal ball. If I had my list of wishes, I mean, this was already something I was wishing for in the past, right? I kind of envision an environment where you could, let's say, be a remote worker and like your office could be just several miles down the road, right? And certain days when you have focal work, you could work from home, you could pop into a meeting and talk with your colleagues potentially that are in the office and kind of collaborate in a much more immersive way. When you go into the office, one thing that I've always been a big proponent of has been kind of free address seating, because I kind of think that just allows the office to be a lot more modular. But when you do free address seating, people are still creatures of habit, right? And they may still end up showing up at the same sort of area. I kind of think with a lot of the analytics that we're doing, et cetera, it could be much more of a Waze type of experience, right? I know how to drive home from work, but Waze tells me, hey, based off the live traffic conditions today, maybe you should take the back road.
Yeah.
So, when I come into the office, maybe when I pre-register saying, hey, I'm coming in today, it says, hey, half your team's in the office, like we're going to put you all on the 6th floor because you have meetings on the 6th floor. So go sit there because it'll suit your day a lot better, versus another day. Right. So that type of experience where it's not just touchless and it's not just autonomous, but, the technology is actually trying to help guide and just make you not a total creature of habit, and hopefully just make the work environment and the experience a lot more immersive and a lot more experiential. That's something I'd love to see. Right.
I think you're going to have to figure out ways for people to put holograms of their children's pictures on their desks. That's one thing.
Yes,
personalization of the workplace,
Absolutely.
and that might be a whole nother discussion, I'm sure. But it's kind of an interesting thing to consider, since that's
really important. I've had conversations even before COVID, right? Even with like some of the younger employees. And they kind of feel like, hey, I'm part of this entity. I do need when you talk about free address, like I do want to assign space, even if it's a tiny little space where I could put my tchotchkes, right? And, maybe some of those tchotchkes aren't physical anymore, but they could be digital, right? And they could be high def and look almost like the real thing, right? And move around with you. So.
Well, this has been great. Thanks so much, Alan, for talking with us. I mean, any final thoughts before we leave? There's so much more we wanted to talk about, so you'll definitely have to come back, and we have to do a part 2 of this, because there's a lot of things that we didn't get into today. But thanks for joining us. Any final thoughts?
I know I'm holding back my comments because that leads into like another 30 minutes. So yeah, thank you, Alan. Before you leave.
I mean, it's been a roller coaster journey for us at Aruba. I know my team for sure. We're thinking about COVID response. How do we get people back into the office safely? I think there's a lot of focus around that. You're hearing through press, whatever, are organizations going in 2021? Is it late 2020? Is it 50%? Is it not? So I think we'll figure that out, and we'll see how organizations progress there. And I'm sure it won't be a smooth ride. It'll probably be a little bumpy. We'll hit some turbulence, right? But one of the, as we kind of think and hopefully get past, just getting the tools to get people back in the office, where my head's going is what's next, right? What do we need to do as an organization to serve our customers? What do organizations just need to do in general? And I do think this hybrid workplace thing is really starting to make it pretty real that a lot of organizations are going to need to adapt, and maybe that we're laggards in trying to change their space. It's going to really accelerate that. So I'm really looking forward to the conversations, the opportunities going forward. And I mean, you could see right now, a lot of the technology companies, I mean, they've actually done pretty well in this environment, simply because they deployed a lot of the technologies to allow us to work remotely pretty effectively, right? And I think other organizations have kind of taken notice. So, and this is no longer a nice to have, right? But kind of a franchise investment, franchise risk mitigation sort of investment. So really looking forward to kind of the upcoming conversations as we switch from this health and life safety thing to how do we just get our work done, right? And looking forward to continue to talk with you guys about the tools to be able to support that going forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alan.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Thank you, Alan. It's great to meet you, and we will be in touch.
Absolutely will. All right. Well, stay healthy, everyone.
Yeah, you too.